It will just ask for permission. So welcome to Flight Free UK's Destination Europe event. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to kick straight off with our first speaker. So Ant, I'm going to welcome you to the floor. Ant is an avid football fan, Leicester City, I believe, and you don't fly, Ant, so you travel to see your football team play in their European matches by train. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the past year, Leicester City have been in Europe, and 6 separate trips I've made following Leicester across Europe. I have to do it by train because I can't fly due to a medical condition. So last year I did Warsaw, Naples, Randers in Denmark, Rennes, Eindhoven and Roma, all on the train. Took about 170 hours, but every hour of it was comfortable, much more preferable to flying. Because I used to fly when I was younger, and obviously it's only recently when I got my medical condition that I can't fly. But I'm sort of, it feels bad, but I'm glad in a way that I can still travel on the train. And a lot of my friends are jealous, and they're sort of saying, next trip you do abroad, I'm going to come with you. You get to stop off different places on the way there. Because I'm a big football fan, I could stop off other football matches along the way. So when I went to Napoli to watch Leicester, I also went and saw 3-4 of the football matches on the way back. Whereas if you just fly into a place, you fly straight to the game and come straight home. So it's, yeah, you get to see a lot more. The scenery on the way there and back, it's amazing on the train. It's the freedom, because I'm still fairly young, so you get to sort of, if you want to spend a day stopping somewhere whilst traveling, you can do that and carry on the rest of your journey. So and when I originally was told I couldn't fly, I thought that's it, I'm never gonna be able to go and travel, like do the things I want to see. But like there's getting the trains everywhere, it's like affordable, it's good views, comfortable journeys. If you book in advance, it's fairly cheap.
So Anne, I was going to ask, because when we first connected, you said obviously it is for a medical condition that is the reason why you have to travel this way, but you then did say, actually, I've discovered that this way of travel is really brilliant, and obviously the emission savings and the having a lower environmental impact is something that I've come to appreciate. So
when you just sort of me going for a full match, you don't think about those sort of things, but definitely come to appreciate that now, 100%. Yeah.
And when you say some of your fellow fans say they're going to travel with you in the future, is that serious? Like, have you had people go with you by train yet?
I've had one of them do the easy one, which was France. That was only that was about 8 hours. That wasn't too bad. But I'm planning on doing a trip to Ibiza later in the year, and
wow.
All my friends are flying there, so I'm getting a train to Barcelona and getting a ferry across to Ibiza. So I'm doing that.
And that's for
Budapest, go to the Hungarian Grand Prix. Like now that I've started doing the train travel, I've got a bug for it now. I just want to keep doing it. So yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. Do you know, so many people say that to us, and that's actually part of the reason why we have this year off pledge. So we don't say, you can never fly again, but we say, could you try it a different way? Because, I mean, from your point of view, Ant, if you didn't have this medical condition, you would still be flying to the matches, right?
Yeah,
but now, because you've kind of been forced to travel by other means, that's sort of changed that's changed your outlook, right?
Yeah, and like I said, it feels bad to say, but I'm not so glad in a way. Like, I honestly have much more, because obviously I used to fly to places like 5-6 years ago when I could, well, a bit longer than that. And honestly, I've come to appreciate how much more you get to see, freedom. Some of my age as well. It's say a lot of freedom. Yeah, it's perfect, really. Yeah.
Good for you. Okay, well, I know that you have to zoom off to play football tonight, but one question before you go, which is, do you think that we could get to a point where more and more people travel to see their team without flying? Because it seems like, you know, international football matches, it is a big draw for people, but it does require a lot of flights. So do you think that more people would travel in this way at some point?
And yeah, especially if you've got the dates for the matches like set in advance, you can book your trains like months in advance. You can actually get like fairly cheap trains, and obviously fans like a few drinks, and the way you can have like some drinks on the way to the game on the trains and that. So yeah, I think it could become a thing.
Yeah.
I'll start the movement.
Yeah, well, you are, and for everybody, just so you know, Ant is kind of a bit of a legend amongst the Leicester fans, and I love actually that everybody's so supportive of you, and they think it's really cool what you're doing. So yeah, well done for doing it, for talking about it, and for sharing your experiences. If you want to follow Ant on Twitter, you guys, or is it Ant Bates 64? Is it
94? Yeah,
94? Okay,
yeah.
Ant Bates 94. Is there an underscore in there somewhere?
Yeah, I think before the 94, I think.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah,
My next
cool.
Leicester City game on there.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. Oh, thanks so much. Right, we'll let you get off to your football match now.
Talking.
But
Thank you.
thanks for joining us. Cheers, Ant. Okay, right, so let's move quickly on to our next guest, who is going to be Olga. So Olga, we connected because you had put on Twitter and that you had travelled from your home in Lancashire to your family home in the south of Spain. And then you wrote us a wonderful blog post about that experience and that travel, which was brilliant to read. It's so inspiring because Spain is our #1 overseas holiday destination of choice. So it's really important, I think, to kind of communicate to everybody that you can travel there without flying, and that you that it's a really positive thing to do. So would you like to tell us all about your journey and kind of why you chose to travel this way, and what your experiences have been? Over to you, Olga.
Great, thank you, Anna. So yes, last summer I spent 2.5 days traveling overland from where I live near Preston to my home, which is right on the southern tip of Spain. So from my grandmother's house, I can see the hills of Morocco across the Straits of Gibraltar. So I couldn't have gone further south. And I did the majority of it. There was a bus at the end, but I did the majority of it once I had got the train down to London on high-speed trains from London to Paris, and then from Paris to Barcelona. And from Barcelona, then I got the Seville train, got off at Cordoba, and got a high-speed train to Malaga, and then then the rest was bus. And I'll come clean. I'm a Spanish person, was brought up in the UK, and I've been shuttling backwards and forwards to home for many, many years. As a child, when my parents took me, I got the plane quite a lot. And there was a time in my life where I was getting the train and using the bus. Particularly when there was a time I lived in France, so sometimes I would go back to England on the bus or go back to Spain on the train. And so I had an experience in my youth of doing quite long journeys. I'd never thought about doing the whole thing because I hadn't got to the place I am now. And then, of course, I sort of grew up, and then I started having a bit more money and a little bit less time. And I did have some flight-free friends, and I kind of thought they were taking it a bit far. And then things have changed recently. I think for me in 2019, I'd always been somebody who was very interested in environmental impacts, and had been vegetarian, used recycled paper and organic vegetables, whatever. But I think something happened in 2019 where I think really the reality of the climate emergency really sort of got under my skin, and I realized that I needed to go up a level. So I started to think about ditching the plane, and then I discovered that there was a flight-free movement, so that was very inspiring too. And I planned to go at Easter 2020. For obvious reasons, that didn't happen. So then I did it last summer. As things started to open up, I thought, right, that is it. I'm going to do the length of that journey, flight free. And I think that the main thing about it is just in terms of organizationally is working out how all the trains work, how they, at the moment, there isn't a sleeper train that goes all the way down to southern Spain. I dare say there will be as they become more of a reality around Europe. So it was then, amassing that information and understanding how to make that journey work, which actually comes in very helpfully, because then people, when they ask about it, I can say, yes, well, there's this one train, and I noticed that there's a train that goes to Germany, and it's actually quite helpful, all that information gathering. And then, of course, these trains, the European trains, are really smooth, they're really fast, they have incredibly long rides. You can be on them for 8 hours, and it is more costly, and I dare say that's something that we all have to reflect on. And I had to just really, really focus that I was doing it just this one time. It was me working it out. I wanted to inspire myself around it too, and that this wouldn't cost the earth as much. And then I had to just have fun with it. I stopped off and saw family in Birmingham. I stopped off and saw a friend in Barcelona, in London. So I kind of just made the journey part of the adventure too, and just enjoyed the fact that I'd given myself that gift of time to just read on a train, fall asleep for a bit, look out the window, and enjoy the kind of the experience of it all. And as I mentioned, I've lived in different parts of France and the UK and Spain. So actually, one of the highlights was seeing all these different places, excuse me, that I know or had traveled to as a young person, all together. And particularly one place around Lyon that up in the mountains, I'd never been back to that area, and just seeing it again was really joyous. Seeing new places, meeting new people, and my real experience was that I did have a sense of having gone overland and just got to know the landscapes really well. I'm going to have to take another sip.
Oh, Olga, are you okay there? Oh no.
Oh, apologies. I've got a frog in my throat.
You carry on.
So yeah, just noticing the trees, seeing
it's
the
okay. Olga, if you want to clear your throat, then I can just say one of the bits that I found most inspiring about your post that you wrote for us, which was after you had done the journey, lots of people were asking you questions about it and saying, maybe just not believing that you could actually travel in that way, all that way, even though, Spain is one of our neighboring countries. It's very close in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, and then you said they kind of started to realize that it could be possible, and that sort of opens people's eyes and their minds to doing things slightly differently.
Yeah, so that people keep asking me about it, and a friend is going to Croatia with her children for the first time. I mean, that she can get a sleeper train, that makes it much more doable. And so yeah, that was really good fun, seeing people sort of think, really, did you do that? And excuse me, and my husband, who was quite skeptical, this year is going to come with me, and so that feels very exciting. And yeah, that just kind of seeing all those places, seeing the land, having this real sense of connection to the land was actually really very beautiful. So I think, yeah, exactly that, Anna, that what was very empowering about it was proving to myself and to the people that it was possible, and that shuttling between my countries, I can do it with organization and time. I can do it flight free.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you for taking it on and being part of the flight free pioneers, I guess, and spreading it around the people around you, because that's also really important and really powerful, isn't it? So yeah, thank you, Olga. And if you're interested, if anybody's interested in reading more about Olga's journey, then it is on our website. So I'll post a link in the chat when I have a chance. And yeah, it's on the travel pages of our website. So and also, if you have any questions or any thoughts that come to you while people are speaking, just pop them in the chat as well. I think I've seen Catherine and Phil give a couple of replies already, so that's brilliant. If we want to share experiences of your personal experiences, or if you have any questions, then please do put them in there. We're going to have a question session later with Catherine, so if you want to put questions in the chat or save your question for a bit later, that's also fine. So yeah, just please do share your experiences, share your questions, and share your thoughts. So thanks, Olga, again. Yeah, just as a kind of summing up, as I said earlier, Spain is we who live here in the UK, is the country we travel to the most on our holidays. So it's really fantastic to know that you can do that without flying, especially to the south of Spain. You know, I feel like Barcelona is much easier, perhaps. Once you have to kind of go down below Malaga, it's getting a bit more of a challenge. So yeah, thank you so much, Olga. That's really great.
Yeah, door to door, it was 1,218 miles.
Woof. Brilliant. Okay, so let's stick with the train. So we've had a few train journeys already being described. Let's stick with the train for a minute, and we're going to go on to Jacob next. So Jacob is a professional musician, a lutenist, and many years ago you decided, Jacob, didn't you, that you weren't going to fly anymore for work, and that's quite a strong stance to take, because we find that it's often quite easy to choose to holiday without flying, because you have free choice, complete choice about where you go and how you get there. But when it comes to work, it can be much more of a challenge, because we often don't have quite those choices in quite the same way. So would you like to just tell us about kind of where that decision came from and how that has generally affected your work life? And also, you're going to tell us about traveling up to Oslo, I believe, is that correct?
Yes, I'd love to. So much has already been said that sounds familiar and rings very true. I've been doing this for 11 years now, from the northeast of England, going all over Europe, including southern Spain and, well, all parts of Spain and Germany and Eastern Europe and so on, Scandinavia a couple of times. Why did I make the decision 11 years ago? Well, mainly for the obvious environmental reason. But there's another thing. As a touring musician, doing a lot of solo stuff and a lot of accompanying singers and so on, I was sometimes flying to the other side of the world to give one concert and then flying home again. Now, after a certain amount of time, that stopped being satisfying, because you fly somewhere far away, you do a concert in a sort of stupor of jet lag, and then you get on the plane and fly home again. What has happened? Not very much. You get home and feel like you haven't really been anywhere. There's a feeling that no meaningful communication happened during the concert itself. And to me, it's really important as a performer to have meaningful interaction with the audience, both in the music and also, sort of around the music. So I wanted you might say, more job satisfaction. And there's something about going by train, traveling in real time. I feel grounded when I get there. I feel like I'm really present. And I can do a better job. I can do my job better. But of course, there are big sacrifices, because I've given up all intercontinental travel. No more trips to Australia, the Middle East, Far East, North America, South America. It's all around Europe. I'm not really complaining, because I love traveling around Europe. And I should also say, as a musician, that this all came at a time that was sort of right for me to slow down a bit. I had been doing it for a long time. For a younger musician just starting out, it would be a huge sacrifice, because very often the time it takes to get from A to B, you simply couldn't afford, not to mention the cost. Some of my colleagues have to flit from one gig to another. They fly around because they don't have time to do it any other way. So I'm lucky, because I made this choice at a time when I was wishing to slow down and have a slightly more laid-back lifestyle, shall we say. So I don't blame the younger musicians, really, who do what they do. Maybe as they get older, they'll change their priorities. That said, I do know some younger musicians who choose to travel by train. And it really does, one individual can't make an enormous difference, but one individual can influence other individuals. And a large number of individuals becomes a force to be reckoned with, really. So those are the reasons. I just want to tell you briefly about one particular trip, which was more interesting than some, and that was the trip from here in the northeast of England to Oslo to make a recording. Now, until 2008, there was a ferry from Newcastle to Bergen in Norway. That was around for 140 years, I believe, and they abolished the thing in 2008, which means I have to effectively go the long way around. It would be very, very handy if that ferry still existed. It's a very different business, as you've already said, Anna, traveling from points other than London. In my case, for example, I could go to London, Brussels, and then across to Oslo, but it makes a lot more sense to get the boat from Newcastle to Amsterdam and then travel to points around Europe from there. So that's what I did. I live in Richmond in North Yorkshire, about half an hour from Darlington, which is a big mainline station on the LNER. So it's a bus ride in the morning from Richmond to Darlington, then a short train journey to Newcastle, and then DFDS lays on a bus from Newcastle station out to the ferry port at North Shields. And then it's roughly 15 hours on the boat. It's a comfortable and relaxing journey. Of course, if you're traveling alone, you still get a little two-person cabin to yourself. It's cheaper midweek, I believe. So it's worth looking at when you're traveling. You get to the ferry port about half an hour from Amsterdam, from the center of Amsterdam, at a place called IJmuiden. And then again, DFDS lays on a bus that takes you to Amsterdam Central Station, if that's where you want to go. So the boat leaves North Shields around late afternoon, early evening, and 15 hours later, so in the morning, you're in Amsterdam, and hopefully you've had a restful night. It's very expensive to eat on this particular journey. Not a bad idea to take your own food if you're on a budget. It's very different with different ferry companies. I've traveled from the south of England to the north of Spain by ferry. That's actually very cheap and reasonable from the point of view of feeding yourself on the journey, which is just as well because it's a much longer journey. So then from Amsterdam, you're safe to go on anywhere really, but not until about lunchtime by the time you get to the center of Amsterdam. So in my case, I spent a day there visiting friends and teaching. I have students all around the place, so I often stop and do a bit of teaching. And of course, as Ant already mentioned, one of the great benefits of doing it this way is you can stop and see people along the way or do some sightseeing. So I stayed a night and then went the next morning all the way to Copenhagen. You can do that from lunchtime in Amsterdam, but you'd get to Copenhagen at a really antisocial hour, like 1:30 in the morning. So the second day of travel was Amsterdam to Copenhagen, which is about, well, in my case, it was about 10 in the morning to about 9:15 p.m. It's via Hamburg, where, as it happens, I have cousins that I could briefly see also. So then stayed with friends in Copenhagen. Again, the great benefit of traveling by train, you can see people along the way. The next day is Copenhagen to Oslo via Gothenburg. Now that is a lovely journey where water plays an important role all the way along. And in fact, if you happen to be traveling on an Interrail Global Pass, which I really recommend for some journeys because it ends up being a lot cheaper, there are some ferries that you can actually take on your Interrail. There's also a very posh ferry all the way from Copenhagen to Oslo, which you certainly can't use your Interrail for, but I'd love to try that sometime. And they say that it's not bad value considering the cost of a hotel room in Oslo. It's actually, you get a bed and a beautiful journey. So coming back, I did choose to go via Brussels and London for complicated reasons to do with the diary. It can be inconvenient to go from, say, Copenhagen to Amsterdam and then get the boat, because, of course, the boat, you'd have to get that bus out to the ferry port middle of the day, which means you're unlikely to get to Amsterdam in time to do that, which means another night in Amsterdam. Brussels is more, in some ways, more convenient. So that's the journey to Oslo and back. As you can see, it's a bit of an investment time-wise. It's a few days each way, but it's not dead time on the train. It's sightseeing, it's talking to people, it's reading a book, it's doing some work, sleeping a bit, whatever. You're traveling in real time and your feet stay on the ground more or less. And I certainly arrive in much better sort of physical and mental shape to do my musical program. So that's the story, really. That's one of many journeys.
Thank you, Jacob. Yeah, completely agree. And I think, especially with as a musician, you do need you give of yourself in your work, don't you? But that's true of many professions. Even if you're simply going for a meeting, you want to be present, don't you? And if you're jet lagged and tired, and it's not gonna be very beneficial. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like some of those tips about things like the Interrail Global Pass we can speak a bit more about later, Catherine, because yeah, that's some really good tips for traveling, getting good value, and of course taking your own food. Definitely love it. You can't do that on a plane, so well done. Yeah, thank you, Jacob. And I will just also include in the chat the link to that to your testimonial that you wrote for us, which it explains a bit more about your reasons for taking this decision, and also it details one of your recent journeys over to Poland. So thank you so much for sharing. Now, let's stick kind of with the Netherlands a little bit. So you spoke about going through the Netherlands there, Jacob, and we're going to welcome Bonnie now. So Bonnie lives in Devon, and you're from the Netherlands though, aren't you, Bonnie? So you travel quite frequently between the two. And very usefully, you travel with your children. So we get lots of questions from people asking about the practicalities of traveling with kids. So yeah, can you tell us a little bit more, please, Bonnie?
Yes, well, I definitely can. So we recently went to the Netherlands with the train. But before I speak about that, we were going to, obviously because of COVID, it all changed. We were going to go to Aix-en-Provence with the train, and we would take the Eurostar to Lille Europe, and then take the direct train to Aix-en-Provence. But of course, that was cancelled. So we took the train to the Netherlands. And of course, post-COVID, we went to see a lot of friends and family. But yeah, Great Western to London, Paddington, swap over to St. Pancras, and then in a direct train to Amsterdam, which was really smooth, really good. Wi-Fi for the kids, so they were pretty occupied. They could walk around. They could go and get some crisps if they wanted to, go to the loo, those kind of things. You can take a lot more luggage in the train. Yes, you need to drag it around wherever you go, but you can take more than you can take in a plane. Within the Netherlands, it's really easy to travel by train. They've got trams, buses, and everything is pretty well organized. And it's all the way the Netherlands. The infrastructure is really good. So once you're on a central station, you can even hire a bike if you just want to stay local, and then return them and come back to the train station and take the train back to wherever you were going to go to. So that does make it really easy to travel around in the Netherlands. Now, as a child, I traveled a lot by train, visiting family, visiting friends. Probably we all did that when we were younger. And as a teenager, Interrail and all those kind of things. So actually, I've grown up really traveling a lot by train. And then, of course, the plane came, and I did, got taken away. But for the last 10 years, we've been cutting down on flying, mainly because of the environment. And also, if you like what the other speaker said as well, if you travel by train, you look out of the window, you can see the scenery change, and it's so much calmer. Now, for me, going to the Netherlands, it's often quite busy, going to see friends and family that I haven't seen for a long time. So, and because I've got my driver's license in the Netherlands. So for me, driving around the Netherlands is a lot easier than for my husband, who is British and of course doesn't have the knowledge. So usually when we drive, for me, it's quite stressful. So to take the train and to just be able to sit and let the kids just fight and whatever they wanted to do was quite relaxing. in a weird way. You can take your bottle and you can just have we will often try to plan it that we did it like lunchtime, so we would have something to eat. So for a longer journey, they would be occupied for 15 minutes but there was another 15 minutes that people were, especially the kids, Now, in the today world, a lot of new stuff like apps. So I was on the go with 3 different apps. Now, for the Netherlands, there's just obviously just one for all the trains. So it's really easy to book a train or to quickly change the schedule. Wherever you go, I would always have a really good look. So in the Netherlands, there's for kids under 11, there's a rail runner card, which is €2.50, and the child can go through the whole country for those 24 hours. For 12 to 18-year-olds, there's a similar thing. It's €7.60, and they can travel all around the country. So if you travel with young kids, do a little bit of digging, because there's cheaper ways to travel. And for us as adults, because I knew exactly what I was going to do, I planned a couple of days in advance. So you don't have to book trains like you do in the UK months and months so to get a cheap train ticket. But in the Netherlands, they say, well, if you book 4 days in advance, you get 10% discount. And that's then the ticket is for that day. It's not for a particular train or not a particular time. There's no reservation of seats. You just arrive, jump in, make sure you scan in and out. Now, there's another really handy thing for the Netherlands, and it's I was going to take it, but it's like a little card, like we all have a bank card, and you can buy it at every train station. It's €7.50, and you can top it up. So it's a pay as you go, and you can use it in the train, in the tram, in the subway, in the buses. I don't know about boats, but you can use it pretty much everywhere. And you just as long as you keep it topped up, you're good to go. And it's really easy, but just obviously there's no discounts, and the kids would then travel as adults, but it does make things very easy if you just, you don't want to think about it. I had a couple of things written down. So what are the disadvantages? To be honest, yes, you need to drag your luggage around. But if I would have traveled by plane, I would have had to drag my luggage around. The convenient bit is then the car. So that's really simple. And then the advantages, I thought, like Jacob said, I arrived really calm and relaxed. And I really loved it to see the scenery. And you don't see the scenery from the car because you see the motorway and you see the other cars. But in a train, you're higher, you go, a little bit more remote, and it's really good. I think I've said everything that I wanted to say.
That's brilliant, Bonnie. I love the sound of the Netherlands, the ticketing system there. It sounds so simple,
It is.
But
it's like the Oyster card, really. That's what I was going to say. It's like the Oyster card you have in London, but then for the whole country.
For the whole country, yeah, fantastic. And from having been to the Netherlands and traveled by train a bit myself, am I right in thinking that the price is related to how far you're going? It doesn't really matter, as you say, how far ahead you book. Although 10% 4 days in advance, that's great. That sounds so simple and perfect. Oh, brilliant. Okay, well, thank you, Bonnie. It's wonderful to hear from you. And so for those of you here as well, I'll also post this link, but Bonnie was on a previous podcast of ours, so sharing a few more of her experiences, which was very inspiring. And that one was specifically about traveling to see family and friends. The main kind of target of our campaign is to get people to think differently about how they travel for holidays. But as we've just explored with Jacob and with you, Bonnie, traveling for work or with your family and for family reasons is also perfectly possible without flying. And in many cases, like as you say, Bonnie, keeping the kids entertained and allowing them to kind of walk up and down the train, that just does make it easier, doesn't it? So yeah.
Can I add one more thing?
Please do, yes.
Because what we speak about, the train does take a little bit more time, but as we've all learned to work from home, if you could manage to put your day's work into the train, because there's Wi-Fi, all these, especially the TGV's and the Eurostar, they've got pretty reasonable Wi-Fi, so people could technically just use an office day, and then suddenly you're in the south of France or you're in Spain. I mean, wouldn't that be amazing? Right.
Yeah, gosh, yeah, that does sound exactly what we should all be doing.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Bonnie. Okay, we have two more speakers to share their stories before we're going to move on to our question session with Catherine. So I've seen some of you putting your questions in already. That's great. Do be thinking about the kinds of questions you want to ask, and we'll come to them in about 10 minutes. Let's now change to a different mode of transport. So Sarah, we're going to come to you next. We've heard mostly about trains, a little bit of a couple of buses, an overnight ferry from Jacob there. But Sarah, I want to ask you about the journey you went on to Italy, and you took the overnight coach, didn't you, as part of that? So I know that you took a couple of trains as well, but one of the main parts was by overnight coach. So do you want to tell us all about that, please?
Yes, we planned a walking holiday in Italy because it sounded quite fun. It was near Perugia. It was near Assisi, and we were going to walk 10 miles a day, then a rest day, and then 10 miles. And so it sounded quite good. My husband wanted to go by plane because he had business meetings, and anyway, he'd rather go by plane. And I looked at the train, and it was quite expensive. So I thought, how about the coach? I think in theory, sometimes coach travel is meant to be even lower carbon than train. That rather depends. So yeah, it was incredibly cheap. In fact, my husband went from Stansted by Ryanair, and we costed it out with his journey to Stansted, having to stay overnight to get a really early plane to Perugia. There was £10. I think my trip was £10 more overall than his on his cheap Ryanair. So my trip cost £48 out to Milan, Paris to Milan, and £38 going back from Milan to Paris. So I got the Eurostar to Paris. Then I decided to walk from the Gare du Nord to the Quai de Bercy, which took me about at least an hour and a half, I think, dragging my suitcase along through Paris. But at least I got a look at bits of Paris. Have a look at the Place de la République and the Bastille and so on. Arrived at the bus station, the bus set off. What was interesting, I thought, was the way in which coach travel is, I think, seen as the means of travel for the poorest. It definitely seemed to be full of Black people and people who seemed quite not affluent. It was nice, it was perfectly clean, it was perfectly acceptable, but I got the impression it was the kind of travel that you use when you're not affluent in Paris. So the coach set off. I timed it so that I could leave home at a reasonable time. So I set off, I don't know, in the morning. My train from Paris left at about, I can't remember, 6 p.m, something like 6 p.m. 12 hours in total, 12 from Paris to Milan. There are 2 stops. One the problem to give the bus driver a rest, so that's okay. I mean, some people were buying food when they got there. I took my own food, that was fine. And then finally, after the first stop, I think it began to be time to think about going to sleep. Sleeping on a coach is not absolutely wonderful, and depends how good a sleeper you are. And I realized that my fellow passengers who'd done it before had neck pillows. It did make it easier. So if you had a little thing to make as a cushion, or you got as a little pillow, you'd be better off to sleep, to doze against the window or whatever. And though I had my 2 seats to myself some of the time, then I think some of the time I had a fellow passenger, which meant less space to kind of stretch out and go to sleep. But I probably got between 3 and 4 hours sleep in total, so it wasn't too bad. We arrived at Milan early in the morning, got a taxi to the rail station, and then I carried on my train to Florence, and then the train from Florence to Perugia. And the whole thing was 28 hours. And the same thing on the way back. I did notice that when I set off, we both set off from Perugia at the same time. When I was halfway between Florence and Milan, hubby was back at Stansted. But it did take quite a long time. But yes, I think the bus, as you say, you see the scenery go by, particularly on the return when we set off from Milan, I can't remember, late afternoon. And you see the scenery changing, and you see the Alps appearing, and then we go up the Aosta Valley, which is lovely. Watched the Aosta Valley, went through the Mont Blanc tunnel, and then as we came out, we could see Mont Blanc in the darkness with the moonlight and so on. Very, very nice. People would actually pay on a trip like that to go and see that kind of thing. If you sold it as a tourist trip, you could actually sell that as a trip in itself. So Yeah, I think the thing that struck me was that the buses were clean, they had loos, it was all quite convenient. I'm not sure what would happen if you spoke no French. Pretty self-explanatory, but I suppose if you wanted to check the bus driver, I think the announcements were probably only in French. And if you spoke not a word of French, you might have to struggle a little bit unless you did your research beforehand to know exactly when you were going to be stopping and so on. I think that the bus services could be, with very little effort, smartened up a lot to make the terminals nicer and so on. I mean, there are people sort of sleeping. I don't know whether they're sleeping in the terminal because they're between buses or whether they're sleeping there because they've got nowhere to sleep. But it's that kind of thing that it's a little bit kind of, you wouldn't find people just dozing off in the middle of an airport, probably. And it does take quite a bit of organisation. I mean, hubby booked one ticket. He booked his ticket with Ryanair and that was it. And I was busy organising my trains and my buses and so on. It does take quite a bit, but you kind of feel that you have actually done some work to make it all work out, and you get it all to mesh, and it's quite satisfying to find you've managed to get it all to work. And yeah, and it's doable. And I kind of calculated that probably the carbon emissions were probably something like a third of the plane. There's no way to do an accurate assessment because it depends how full the bus is, how full the plane is, that kind of thing. But it's probably considerably lower carbon than flying. And I've not been in a plane for probably 16 years and have no intention of getting on a plane again. So it's interesting, yeah, that you can do it by bus and train. It works. If you're a really bad sleeper and really like a 8 hours good sleep, perhaps the bus during the night time might not be for you. But otherwise, yeah, great, doable. Yeah, would do it again. It works.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. I think that's a good tip with the neck pillow. I have travelled overnight to Edinburgh by coach, and my goodness, I wish I had taken a pillow or some earplugs or an eye mask rather, sorry. I think that's any overnight journey. Perhaps ferries are probably the most comfortable of all transports overnight. With a train as well, overnight trains, sleeper trains and sleeper coaches, definitely having those things to make the journey more comfortable, the earplugs, the eye mask, the neck pillow. Yeah, I think that's a really good tip. And also interesting that you said about the language, because on the train network, most of the announcements will also be in English, even the further away from England you go, or from the UK that you go. Yeah, that's a good tip as well. Although I just saw Phil sneak a little comment into the box there about a recent coach journey you've done. So you probably talk about that in a second, Phil. But yeah, thank you, Sarah. I just linked the post that you wrote for us about that particular journey, which is on our website. So that's now on the chat as well, if you want to have a look at that. Okay, now on to our final speaker. So we're going to welcome Phil, and you are, we haven't talked about bicycles at all yet, and you are a very big cyclist. So thanks so much for joining us. It's great to have you. And yeah, please do tell us all about, I mean, I can see that you've already been writing some really cool comments in the chat about your experiences. So take the floor. Away you go, Phil.
Cool. Cheers for having me, Anna. Yeah, I am a little bit strange, some might think. I've been a bike nomad for 4 years. I've not lived anywhere for 4 whole years. I kind of was living in the States for a while on a visa. That all went to hell. Sold everything I owned apart from my bicycle, and then just started cycling around. So one of the last flights I took was getting out of the States. I didn't realize you could take shipping, you can do container ship cruises. So if I knew about that at the time, I would have done that. But ended up in Spain and just started cycling and haven't really stopped. So I ended up doing about 35 countries in 2019. Just cycling the whole time. I only got like one train when my bike completely fell apart. The sort of thing that's so broken you can't zip tie it back on again. But got all the way from Spain to Albania via every silly little country that you kind of forgot existed on the way. And so I had a really good time doing that. And I realized how little I need to fly anywhere. Even when I was injured, in Albania, I got a ferry to Italy and a train home, and it was fine. Doing those super long distance bike rides was fine at the time because I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life now that America was done. And I was working remote full time. So I'm just a software engineer, crack out the laptop at any cafe in the world, do a bit of work, you're totally fine. Which does help a lot, as previous people have said, with taking a train somewhere, you can just crack out the laptop. But now I don't have quite so much time to do that. I turned into I've started up a tree planting charity, and I spend all my time all winter madly planting trees. So once that 6-month ordeal was done, just running around the country trying to plant as many trees as possible, I decided it was time for a little bit of a holiday. And there was a bike race happening in Italy. So brilliant. I've got to get from the UK to Naples. I was I popped over to Amsterdam on the ferry because I'm a Dutch resident now. And yeah, it was actually quite easy. I was thinking about cycling the whole way down, but the Alps are a little bit hilly and I was in a little bit of a rush. So what I ended up doing was taking a Flixbus. It's a coach that that coach was going from Amsterdam to Milan. It only cost £80, and you can just stick your bike right on the back of that thing. I was originally a bit concerned about that. I was really worried that it was going to like Italian job off into a ravine somewhere and just be gone forever. But I really did just like slap it on the back of that bike, on the back of the coach, and had some assistance from some man who did not work for the company. So that was terrifying. And it was fine. My bike was just there when I got there. No one stole it. And that's a lot nicer than taking a flight, because when you take a flight, you just know that they're throwing it about in the hold, playing basketball with your expensive mode of transportation. So when I got to Milan, I'd slept. I don't always sleep really well on coaches, but whiskey is fine. And when I got to Milan, all I did was find the nearest cafe, have a little espresso, put myself together, get everything on the bike, change into my little spandex there, and just cycle down to Naples. That was a fun trip. Then there was a bike race that heads back. You don't really want to hear too much about bikes, but did a whole bunch of mad off-roading, sleeping off the side of a cliff in my hammock, remembering to get off to the right, not the left. That would be certain death. And when my trip was done on the bike, I was back in Milan. And so again, 74 quid from Milan to London. It's really cheap. Like, people forget how cheap the coaches are. I hear people say, well, I'd love to take the plane, but I'd love to avoid flying, but the trains are so expensive. Like, those are the only two options in the world. Annoyingly, a lot of the people on this bike race, there were a couple of people who were like, I'd love to take the train, but I have to fly because the train's £300 and the flight's only 50. And I'm like, right, but you're clearly a 6-figure salary person who is riding a £4,000 bike on a little jolly around Italy that you chose to come on with at least £800 of spandex and like £250 cycling goggles. So like, you're not really at a place where you need to be saving 200 quid on this trip. But even if you ignore that, like the £50 flight that they were talking about, it's going to cost them another £50 to check their bike or a bunch of other luggage to come with them. And you're probably going to end up buying a £500 hard shell case for your bike just to stop it getting completely turned into paste. So like the money argument doesn't even really work out anyway. And so the money isn't that different. The time isn't that different. The experience was more enjoyable. I was, having a drink and having a laugh with some people on a coach instead of having someone dribbling on my shoulder, falling asleep on a plane. So I had a really good time taking the bus, and I would recommend it to people who need to travel with a bicycle, because if you are trying to get far away in Europe with a bike, some of them are really annoying about taking a bike. You can use the OBB, that's the Austrian train service. OBB are really good at giving you train ticket information for any European trip. And you just say, and I've got a bike with me. And they'll go, nah, sorry, you can only go this far. And so it can help you find out where to go with a bike. But in order to avoid trouble with trains in the future, I've bought myself a folding bicycle, not like a little silly Brompton, but like a full-size bike with kind of scaffolding connectors. And I can just kind of whip that bike in half. So if they say, only folding bikes allowed, I'll be like, yeah, this is a folding bike, up yours. And that means I can go anywhere by train. But if you're not able to buy like a custom steel bike and get it all fancy, buses are a really good way to get around Europe with a bike without damaging it, without crushing it, without needing to find a cardboard box or disassemble your bike or any of that other faff that they demand that you do for trains or planes. And it avoids kicking the planet in the face, which is pretty handy. Yeah, cheers.
Wow. It's so useful, Phil. Like if any of us are considering taking a bike on holiday, which I am in August, so thank you for all the tips. Yeah, it seems to be bikes and trains really should go together, you know, or bike travel, because it's so low carbon, it makes perfect sense for flight-free travel. Bicycles do. And so knowing that you can combine that with other modes of transport, that's brilliant. You know, that's really good that we can have that flexibility and that freedom. So yeah, thanks for that. Really appreciate those stories. And also very true what you say about the cost, because I feel like still we see the headline cost of the flight and compare it to the headline cost of the train and say, oh no, I can't possibly afford that, even if, as you say, you can. But then you forget all of the extras, and by the time you've added all those extras, like Sarah said in her story, the difference between your husband's flight, Sarah, and your coach and train journey was 10 quid. I mean, you know, that's no difference at all. So yeah, I think it's very difficult sometimes to kind of push back against the whole concept that flights are cheaper, because on face value they are, but actually when you look at the cost of the whole journey as a whole, then it's a different picture, isn't it? And perhaps we can talk about that some more now in our session with Catherine. So welcome, Catherine, from the No Fly Travel Club. Everybody, I am monitoring the chat box now, so if you would like to put some questions in there, or if you would like to ask a question, like actually physically ask it, then please raise your hand. We'll be very happy to hear from you. And if you have any questions for any of our wonderful speakers, then also please direct it to them, because anything more you want to hear from them, now is your chance. So I've taken a few questions out of the chat box already, Catherine, so let's start with these.
Shall I just do a quick intro? Would that be
useful? Oh, of course, yes. Thank you so much.
We jump into it.
Please do. Sorry.
That's okay. It's okay. Yeah. So just before we get into the questions, just a quick intro to me and to what I do. So my name's Catherine. I'm the founder of No Fly Travel Club, which is a flight-free travel company and also membership club. So we run trips which you can book on our website, but we also the part of the business that we're building up at the moment is a membership club, which will be a community of flight-free travel enthusiasts, and it also, being part of that community, allows you to have a certain amount of advice every year on planning your own trips. So that's hopefully something that's relevant to everybody. And my kind of experience is working in rail travel and sustainable travel, which I've been doing for the past 10 years. So I have hopefully got some experience to answer your questions with, and yeah, looking forward to diving in.
Brilliant, thanks, Catherine. And do you want to, at some point before we finish, do you want to pop your links in the chat as well, so everybody's got those website and social media and stuff? Okay, cool, right. So we've had a few conversations going on already, which is lovely to see. One question specifically about traveling to Istanbul without flying. So Catherine, do you have a few suggestions of how to get to Istanbul without flying, please?
Yes, so I actually did this journey in 2019. It's not the shortest journey. It takes about 4 days. I think 4 days is the minimum that you can do it in. But it's possible to do it. The easiest time of year to do it is between April and October, because some of the trains are seasonal, so they only run during the summer months. But you can do it by going, well, there's a couple of different ways to do it, but the easiest way is to take the Eurostar to Brussels, and then go onwards through Germany to Munich. Then you can take an overnight train from Munich to Budapest. If you want, you can break up the journey there, spend a few nights in Budapest. Then you can take an overnight train to Bucharest. Again, you could break up the journey, which is what we did. And then finally, you can take an overnight train again from Bucharest to Istanbul. So it's actually a really nice journey because quite a lot of the travel is overnight. So you can stop off on the way without spending extra on accommodation. So that would be my top tip for how to get there, but I do appreciate it's quite a long way. So you definitely want to make a kind of longer trip of it than just going for a few short days.
Very comprehensive. Thank you, Catherine. That's brilliant. So we should probably get this in straight away, that there's also the encyclopedic website, seat61.com, and that has very practical information of how to get to pretty much any country in the world without flying. So yeah, definitely recommended as well. Okay, so we've had someone ask, so Soph asking about traveling with a dog, traveling with pets. I can see that a few people have already responded on the chat, but do you have anything to add there, Catherine? I don't know if you have experience of or tips for traveling with pets.
So I mean, it's not, to be honest, something that I'm an expert in, just to put it out there. I know that you can travel with dogs on those trains. I think you probably have to book like a pet slot in advance. Sometimes there's a small supplement for that, but probably Seat 61 is a great place to go for advice on that particular topic, because he does have a lot of niche subjects covered. So yeah, I haven't got too much to add on that one, but each rail operator is probably slightly different. So you'd have to kind of look into each individual country where you're traveling and see what the provider says.
Okay, and now we've recommended Seat 61. This leads us on to the next query from Wendy, who asks if you've got any recommendations for booking sites. So yeah, Seat 61 tells you information, but you won't book through that. So what are the best places we can book our journeys, Catherine?
Yeah, so obviously, if you are looking to book it yourself, if you're traveling in France, Germany, Italy, Spain, you can actually use the train line to book your journey all the way through in most cases. So it doesn't always give you all of the options, because some of those tickets might not be available until a certain amount of time before you travel, and because they're coming from different providers, it doesn't always show up everything. But as a point to start from, Trainline is definitely a good place to begin. The other one I would recommend for research is Deutsche Bahn, so bahn.de. You can't always buy the tickets from there, but it will give you a really comprehensive overview of the options, and you can then go to the individual providers to book those tickets. Unfortunately, at the moment, there isn't one place you can go just to buy everything, which is kind of why we exist, to try and make it easier for people, because I recognise that that is something that is not straightforward at the moment. The reason is just that, unlike airlines, unfortunately, all the train companies operate on different systems. So there's currently no way to integrate all those different systems together and book one journey all the way through. So yeah, I would say Trainline for kind of Western Europe. Otherwise, OBB is good for kind of Central Europe. I think somebody's mentioned that before. There's a website called České dráhy, which is quite good for Czech trains. But again, it's not always, the translations are not always 100%. So yeah, if you can book through another company that can help you, that can help you to kind of get around those logistical issues with the booking sites. But yeah, hopefully that gives a little bit of information.
And also Rail Europe.
Yeah.
So I use that one quite a lot. Okay, thank you. Now let's talk about Interrail, because it seems like there was a lot of chat on Interrail in the chat, which is very useful. One of the questions was, are we as UK citizens now, because of the horrible B word, are we still eligible to get Interrail global passes? And we are. There's even a little part on the Interrail website that says UK citizens can still buy this and use this. So do you want to give us a bit more information about Interrail, the Interrail pass then, especially as Jacob recommended it as a way to bring the cost down in many cases?
Yeah, absolutely. So Interrail is a ticket which UK citizens and other European citizens can buy, which enables you to travel for a certain number of days during a set period of time on all the different rail networks within Europe. There are some caveats to that. So you can travel on pretty much any train, but you can't just get on. Most trains in Western Europe, like any high-speed train, overnight train, in France, Italy, Spain, you have to purchase an additional seat reservation. So there is some organisation that you have to do. You can't just buy the ticket and go, but very often it works out cheaper because the ticket, the Interrail ticket itself starts from about 240 euros, I think, maybe slightly less for if you're under 28, the price is a bit more if you're over 28. But then you might spend 100 euros extra on the reservations maximum, but it's still probably going to be cheaper than buying all the different tickets individually. And certainly if you're traveling to Central Europe, Switzerland, Austria, the reservation prices are much lower, and in some cases you don't need them. So for certain countries, it makes it an absolute bargain because you really can just use the ticket, but it just takes a little bit of research to find out where it's going to be best value. And certain countries in Western Europe, it is a little bit more expensive. They do sometimes do sales. I think someone's just said in the chat there was 50% off Interrail. There was 50% off certain Interrail passes, not all of them, but some of them. So yeah, just keep an eye out for the sales, because that is also a good way to grab a bargain. But we, as part of the kind of membership side of what we do, this kind of advice is definitely something that we can help with. It's not necessarily straightforward. Interrail is quite confusing. There's a lot of rules. If you've started to look into it, you've probably found that there are many pages on the Interrail website with lots of different advice, so it can be a bit overwhelming.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a specific question about a trip to Berlin from Sue. So Sue's saying, how big a gap should you leave for connecting trains? Because of course, if you miss one and you've got your ticket, it's sort of your fault. You need to yeah, the train guard might not look too kindly on you. Although there is some advice from the man in seat 61. So he recommends that you buy a through ticket, which means you would be booking it all on one booking site rather than going to the individual booking companies' sites, because that means that if one of the trains in the chain is delayed, you will get put on the next one for no extra cost. Whereas if you've got individual tickets for each one, then you're stuck. But Sue specifically asks, can I get from Berlin to St Pancras in one day? Is that possible?
Yeah. Okay, so I'll just talk very briefly about the point about no, I was just going to add to what you said about oh sorry, my mind's just gone blank. Mentioned something before, I'll come back to it.
About the through tickets, is that right?
The through tickets, yes. Yeah. So I would say it's always worth trying to get on the next one, because 90% of the time, in my experience, even if technically you don't have a through ticket, if you know you're going to be late and you're going to miss connection, find the train conductor who's on your ticket, on your train, and get them to write a note on your ticket or on a piece of paper to say my train was late. Most of the time, if you plead your case, maybe try a little bit of the local language, they will let you on. But yes, if you book a through ticket, they have an obligation to put you on. So that's a good tip. In terms of going straight through to Berlin, I think I've made it back from Berlin in a day to London. It is a long journey. It's about 6 hours to Amsterdam, and then you can continue via Eurostar from Amsterdam directly. Yeah, So it's possible. It's probably quite long. I think you could do it the other direction as well, but sometimes the timings don't quite line up, so you might not be able to get to Amsterdam in time to pick up the final train of the day. So it doesn't always quite work out like that. However, there is hopefully in the next 2 years, the date unfortunately keeps getting pushed back, but we're hoping it's going to start soon. There should be a new overnight train that is going to be starting between Brussels and Prague, and that will stop at Berlin on the way. So it should be possible in the next some period of time, hopefully sooner rather than later, to do that journey in a much shorter amount of time and probably do it overnight.
Brilliant. I should apologise. Someone's just parked up outside with very loud music. So.
Oh, sure. I just remembered I haven't addressed your question about gaps, so I'll do that.
Okay, yeah, go.
While you're talking about that. So regarding the gaps and the amount of time to leave, what I always suggest, if you can, is to align it with meal times. So let's say if you've got a whole day of travel and you need to fit in 2 changes, if it's possible, try to work out where you could break up the journey so that you could have like lunch in your first gap and then dinner in your second gap. And then you can leave like 2 or 3 hours to be absolutely sure that you're not going to miss the connection, but you're not going to be hanging around for that whole time, because you can go to a restaurant or a cafe and at least have a nice meal while you're waiting and not just be killing time in the station, because nobody wants to be doing that. You can also, there's often left luggage places in stations. So if you know that you're going to be stopping off somewhere and you've got, let's say, the journey is doable in a day and you've got a bit of spare time, you could also stop off somewhere that you want to have a quick look around for, let's say, 3 hours, 4 hours. Put your left luggage in the kind of hold in the station, have a little wander around, or bring a backpack and just take it with you, so that you can do like a mini sightseeing tour while you're there and not just be sitting waiting for your connection, but having plenty of time to get it in case you are late.
Brilliant, thanks, Catherine. Very, very comprehensive there. Just to let everybody know, this session finishes at 9. So thank you all for still being here and asking your questions. So yeah, we still have plenty of time to answer questions. So please do put them in the chat. We've got one that's about the booking, the period of time that you can book ahead. So it seems like, and this is one of the frustrating things, isn't it, about traveling without flying, because if I could book a flight now for 6 months time, but you can't book the train in advance, quite that much in advance. So what are the timings for it, do you know?
Yeah, so with the Eurostar, you actually can book up to 6 months in advance. So that's a good one to know about, because if you, let's say if you use the train line and you put in your journey from Europe, from somewhere in the UK to Paris, it won't show you the options far enough in advance, because the other journeys you may not be able to view yet. But the Eurostar itself, if you just buy that on its own, you can buy that up to 6 months in advance, and it is much cheaper. So that's good to know. Other train operators, it's usually 3 to 4 months maximum. Sometimes when the timetables change, which happens usually once in the winter and once in the summer, sometimes that can be only like a month in advance, and unfortunately it's quite unpredictable. So you can't always be sure how far in advance you will be able to book. All I can say is it's probably between 2 and 3 months is usually what I would recommend to get the best prices. And if you can't find the tickets, just keep checking back until they come up.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so that hopefully answers Rosalind's question as well, which was specifically about Lyon to Milan in September. So yeah, it's a bit early for that now. And Rosalind also asked about companies that take your luggage. So is that an option? Are there courier companies in Europe that would take your luggage for you?
So when you're traveling on the train and have the luggage brought along with you?
I guess so, yeah.
Well, I mean, you certainly can have your luggage shipped to arrive when you get there. I'm not sure. I don't know specifically about that it's not something I've done, so I can't give very much advice about it. You probably have to research that one. So
yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, so we have, even though this event is Destination Europe, we do have a question about New Zealand, getting to New Zealand without flying. Mary, it looks like Mary's family is in New Zealand, so that is a challenge, isn't it? I mean, the direct opposite of the planet, the direct opposite side of the planet. And so, like we pointed to Seat 61 before, seat61.com. It does have information on how to get to New Zealand without flying. So if you want to look it up, but yeah, that's quite a commitment because of course it is a huge distance and it would take a very long time. But something like traveling across to as far as you can get by train and then getting on a cargo ship to do your final stretch. I mean, even from Australia, New Zealand is bloody miles, you know. It's a very long flight even from New Zealand to Australia, so it's an even longer journey without flying. But yeah, have a look at that website because there will be it's probably quite entertaining to read those kinds of that information about how you would do such a huge journey. We've had quite a nice little comment, or quite a thoughtful comment about traveling by yourself in Europe, and someone asking, so this is Heather asking about safety and also loneliness, which I think those are two quite important things that we perhaps overlook because we're too busy thinking about the practicalities of it. But I've noticed that some people have written some quite nice comments in response to that, but should we talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really important point, isn't it? And it's definitely something, I mean, I've done a lot of traveling on my own in Europe. And it's not something that you can just ignore, even though we know, and I think I've said to Heather, it's, you know, we are lucky that Europe is a very safe, relatively safe place for most of us. However, of course, you can't be 100% certain that nothing will happen, that we don't always have control over what happens around us. So I suppose my tips in terms of safety would be, when you're booking, if you're looking at booking train journeys, think about the timings that you're going to be arriving and leaving. If you're somewhere unfamiliar, try not to book really early starts or really late nights because you don't really want to be waiting in station by yourself when it's very early or there's not many people around. Try to stick to the kind of main part of the day where you know there will be people. If you're looking at where to change trains, try to change somewhere which is a major city. Don't avoid, if you can, changing in a very rural place where there's not going to be many people around and there won't be people to ask. In cities, people are more likely to speak English or your language, so there's more chance of finding somebody who can help if you do have any problems. I'd also recommend, which sort of addresses both the safety and the loneliness point, I think doing group activities when you're in a city is a really nice way to meet people, and also if you pick kind of responsibly focused activities, it's also a nice way to give back economically to the place that you're visiting and to learn from a local guide or a local company who can provide some insight into the local culture. And usually I've found that when traveling on your own, it makes such a difference just to have a connection with a few people, perhaps who speak your language in a group. And you might find that there are some other people traveling on their own who you might then want to kind of meet up with. And, you know, you've kind of explored that in a safe environment rather than having to, you know, meet people just completely randomly. Somebody mentioned hostels as well. I think that's not perhaps something that everybody would feel comfortable with, but certainly that's something to consider. They're a lot cheaper, they're sociable. They are not all party destinations. There are a lot of kind of quite relaxed and just open places where you can stay and meet other travelers. Yes, I don't know, there's a lot more I could say, but does that kind of give a little bit of an overview?
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. That's a really great answer. Okay, I think we'll have just one or two more questions. I've got two more written down here. So one of them is about night trains from the UK. So obviously we've got night trains within the UK if you're traveling down to Cornwall, between Cornwall and London, and then between Edinburgh and London, and Inverness, Aberdeen as well, the Caledonian Sleeper, Glasgow. So those are the night trains that we have in the UK. But what about night trains from the UK? And I suppose the simple answer is that there aren't any. You have to get through the Eurotunnel first by the Eurostar. And frustratingly, when the Eurotunnel opened, there were plans to run night trains through it. They bought the rolling stock. They even made some stations in the north of England because it was going to be from Edinburgh, from Manchester, from Bristol, Plymouth. There were a couple of other locations I can't remember now, but yeah, that was the initial plan, and it hasn't helped us that those things never came to anything in the end, because wouldn't that have been such a game changer in terms of European travel from the UK, especially if you are coming from the far reaches of the UK, because often, if you are in London, it's pretty much a no-brainer. But when you add those extra distances, but everybody who has spoken this evening has been coming from other parts of the UK, which is very inspiring as well. So it's perfectly possible to do. But yes, I think that's the answer to that one, isn't it, Catherine? That once you're across the channel, that's when the night trains start.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting one because it's actually something that a lot of European countries are investing more in and looking to develop, particularly from Brussels and Amsterdam. There are quite a few overnight trains which are now running or which are planned for the next for the kind of near future. So if you are coming from, well, even if you're coming not from London, if you're coming from further afield than London, I would say it makes a huge difference, because what you're going to need to do in either case is to get yourself to Brussels or to Paris or to Amsterdam for let's say 8 p.m. before your next night train leaves. So you've got that whole day anyway. If you're coming from London, you're just going to start a bit later. But if you're coming from Edinburgh, let's say, you're just going to get your train in the morning and then connect up. So it definitely is doable, and certainly within 24 hours, there are plenty of destinations you can get to easily. One of the best ones, I think, is Vienna. So there's a really comfortable night train that runs from Brussels and from Paris to Vienna. It takes about 10 hours, 12 hours. It arrives at nice times. You can book a really comfortable overnight cabin. They give you breakfast in the morning. You have a duvet. They give you some champagne. It's really nice. And I think that would be an amazing one to kind of, if you're looking for a destination, I'd recommend that one as an overnight kind of adventure from the UK.
Brilliant. And so Sue asked as well, this is the final thing we'll talk about, she mentioned the added cost of stopovers, because if you're traveling over several days rather than just a few hours of a flight, then you are, as much as it adds to the experience, it also does add to the cost in terms of those stopovers. So perhaps it is working in those night ferries, the night trains, because then you're not paying for a hotel, you're paying for a couche or couchette, God, or a berth in a train, which is great value, because of course you travel while you sleep, and that seems to be the most efficient way to do it if you're going to avoid flying. And there are also options if you need, because often if you're coming from parts of the UK to then cross over to maybe get the last Eurostar or whatever, you might want to have a stopover in Paris or in Brussels, or you might want to have one in London before perhaps getting the first Eurostar of the day, the next day. And there are some pretty cheap accommodation near the stations, especially in London. You can get some quite cheap hotels, and so it doesn't have to be extortionate, even if you add a few days to the itinerary.
Yeah, definitely agree. And as much as obviously there is a cost involved, of course, and if you can travel overnight, that's great. But I think you can't play down the kind of experience element to it. I mean, For example, had a client coming from Sheffield recently, and they traveled to the Loire Valley, and on the way they had an evening in Paris. And you know, that's an evening in Paris that they wouldn't have had otherwise. They spent, you know, they went down to the left bank, they had a lovely meal, and I think it's easy to kind of look at it and think, oh, that's just an extra cost. But when you're actually there and you're kind of doing it, as many people have said in their stories about their overland travels, those are the kind of parts of the adventure that make it so enjoyable. So I think it is a little bit about reframing how you see it, and rather than seeing it only in cost perspective, also seeing it as a kind of as part of the experience. And yes, of course, you can always find budget-friendly places to stay. If you book well in advance, you'll find cheaper places to stay. And yeah, that would be those are my thoughts.
Right, well, thank you so much, Catherine, for all your insights. That's just brilliant. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for attending. I want to thank our speakers who shared their really inspiring stories. So we had Ant, who's had to drop off, Olga, Jacob's already gone as well, Bonnie, Sarah and Phil. So thank you so much for being here, you guys. And Catherine, of course, for answering all your questions so expertly. So we have tons of information on our website. We share people's stories because that is the most inspiring way to show people that it's completely practical and desirable to travel without flying. So please look at the travel pages on our website. If you go to flightfree.co.uk, and it's the Be Inspired tab at the top, and then there's a travel category. So please do that. We have also we've been asked about future events. So we run an event every couple of months, and they are mostly online at the moment, but we are going to investigate doing things back in real life again as we used to. Maybe we'll do a bit of a mixture of both, because it's nice to be able to do this as well. So yeah, please do look out for our events, our upcoming events. You can find most of the information about that on our social media. So it is so we're at Flight Free UK on Twitter and Instagram, and then our Facebook is facebook.com/flightfreeuk. So and we share our information about our events in our newsletter as well. So if you're signed up to all those things, then you will find out about our future events. Please also, if you are inspired by the stories you've heard tonight, we would love to have you to join our Flight Free pledge. So we're collecting pledges for Flight Free 2022. As you've seen, it's perfectly possible to travel without flying for holidays, for work, and to visit our friends and family. So please do sign up. It's not only about reducing emissions, but it's also about showing that this is a thing, and we're trying to create this movement away from air travel as the default. And finally, I would like to say this has been a free event. So if you have enjoyed it, if you've learned anything, if you've smiled, if you've laughed, if you've heard something new that you hadn't heard before, please consider giving us a donation. So you can do that via our website. Our campaign is run by a lovely team, most of whom are volunteers, but we do obviously have costs for the campaign to keep it running and to inspire more people to try traveling without flying. So if you have been inspired by this evening, then go onto our website, flightfree.co.uk, and click the donate button. You can donate as much or as little as you like. You can make any size of donation you like to there. So please do that. And yeah, show your support for our work. We'd be very, very grateful for that. So I'll put the website in the chat box right now. And yeah, there it is. I'll also be sending an email to all the attendees as well with all the links that were mentioned this evening. And as this event has been recorded, it will also be uploaded to Facebook afterwards. So you'll be able to watch back if you'd like to. So all that remains for me to say is thank you so much for coming, for attending, and I wish you all a wonderful bank holiday weekend and safe flight-free travels. Thanks, everyone. Good night.